This is a video from the topic B6 looking at inheritance, variation and evolution, and it's a triple science video looking at the theories of evolution by Lamarck and Darwin. And Lamarck, that we just have to remember his name as Lamarck, first name was Jean-Baptiste, but if we just remember Lamarck, he believed that whatever happens to you during your lifetime, all those environmental changes that happen to you, he believed you could pass those on to your offspring. Okay, we know this not to be true, but we have to look back at what was believed in the past. So what he said was, looking at an example of giraffes, is he said that if a giraffe stretches its neck to reach for those leaves higher up, then that environmental change of stretching its neck in reaching, they will pass on to their offspring. Okay. Now, at the time, that kind of sounded like maybe it could be the case that you could believe that this giraffe had stretched its neck to get to the leaves. But basically, the idea that Lamarck was explaining is he is basically saying if you were to have your leg amputated and then have a child, your child would be born without that leg. If you were to have a tattoo and then you have a child, the child would have the same tattoo. That's essentially what Lamarck was saying, and we know this not to be true. And Lamarck was actually proved wrong by another scientist who took lots of mice, cut their tails off, and when they reproduced, the offspring were born with tails. And that was the evidence that proved that Lamarck was incorrect in his theories. Following Lamarck, we had Darwin's theory of natural selection. Now, we've talked about this in other videos, in speciation and in the natural selection video. And Darwin's ideas are what we believe now to be true. So he said that there are mutations, which are genetic mutations, and sometimes those mutations enable giraffes, as our example, to be born with longer necks. Therefore, they can reach the food higher up. They will live longer, reproduce and pass on those features to their offspring. And we've talked about that as a 3-mark answer, this idea of natural selection, the mutation being beneficial, being able to live longer, being able to pass on that gene to the offspring. And basically, Darwin's ideas knocked Lamarck out the park, okay, proved Lamarck to be wrong, along with the scientist who'd done the experiment with the mice and cutting their tails off. And Darwin's theory, survival of the fittest through natural selection, is what we believe today. Now, we talked about these mutations before. Sometimes we get those slight copying errors. Sometimes they are so slight that it's like when we spell a word incorrectly, we can still work out what the word is. So sometimes those mutations are so insignificant, they don't make a difference to the actual features of the organism. Sometimes those mutations are significant enough that we get a new feature, a new trait, and if that trait is beneficial, then the organism will live longer and pass those genes on to their offspring. If it's not a very useful mutation, then the organism won't live long enough to reproduce and pass it on, so it will just disappear. And he called this natural selection, survival of the fittest. It's important to realise that although we're using giraffes as examples, this isn't everything that they talk about. Okay, so this is just a particular example, and the situation with the mice was using the ideas of Lamarck to prove him wrong. So Darwin wrote this book, The Origin of the Species, in 1859, and there's a picture there top left of Darwin, and top right is a picture of Darwin that was created for a newspaper, and they were kind of making a bit of a mockery of Darwin, poking fun at him because he said that he believed that humans had evolved from apes. So they made this picture of him because they just thought it was so absurd that we could have evolved from apes. So it wasn't until Charles Darwin died and we had more evidence of genetics that actually his ideas were proved to be right. So we know now that evolution is this theory that all species alive today evolved from simple forms more than 3 billion years ago. Okay, this is what scientists believe. Darwin's theory is that evolution takes place by this natural selection. No one's intervening, it's just naturally happening that we get these mutations that can be beneficial and then passed on to offspring. So why didn't people believe Darwin? They didn't believe Darwin because he said that humans evolved from apes, and that theory challenged the idea that God made all the animals and plants that live on Earth. People said that there was insufficient evidence because he didn't have those ideas of genetics. He just had a lot of what he looked at was involving his finches from the Galapagos, and there weren't many other scientists agreeing with the ideas that he had at the time, and we didn't know about these ideas of genetics and inheritance until 50 years after Darwin published his theory. So let's finally have a quick look at Lamarck's theory versus Darwin's theory. So we know that Lamarck was wrong. Darwin's theory is what we believe today. So Lamarck said that changes that occur in an organism can be inherited. So anything that happens to that organism during its life can then pass on those genes to their offspring. And the idea that if you were to dye your hair, your child would be born with that dyed hair. We understand that's not the case now. Lamarck also said that evolution occurs by the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And the theory is unlikely as acquired characteristics do not affect genes. So if you dye your hair, your genes are still exactly the same. It doesn't affect your genes. Darwin's theory was about evolution by natural selection. He said that genes which give an organism a competitive advantage will be selected. They will be able to outcompete everybody else and therefore survive. And Darwin said that acquired characteristics cannot be inherited, okay, which we know to be true now. Hope you found that useful. Thank you.